Morning, folks. It's a brisk day here on the homestead. Looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. The sun's coming out. As always, we are going to work on a project today. But the other day when I was working with Blaze, I also worked with the little stud horse. A lot of stuff I don't video because it's just the same stuff over and over and over. Building a repertoire with the horse, you know, just getting them into a routine. But there was a few things that I introduced to him this time that are new. So anytime I introduce something new, I like to bring it to you. It's a little bit of a lengthy video, but I hope you enjoy it. So here's the footage of me working that young stud horse the same day that I worked with Blaze.
Alrighty, folks, I've got this stud coat here in this little square pin, and I set these pins up like this on purpose. And what I do is I teach these horses to give, just like that right there, to tip their head inside, and then I'll apply pressure to their hindquarters. And when I use pressure with a stick, it's not about getting the horse to go forward, it's about to move the hip away from me. I'm always looking for that semicircle form as the horse is going around me. And these little square pins really work well for this. He's full of energy right now and moving his feet pretty quick and really excitable. These are really good to teach change of directions in. Here I'm pulling on him, and I'll just put that stick out in front of him, and I might tap him a little bit on the neck just to teach him to change direction. There again, I'm always trying to put a particular body part into a particular position. It's never about going faster or going at all. If I reach out there and put pressure on his hip, it is to move that hip away from me, or to move his head away from me, or change his position or direction. So right here, he stops, and I give him that opportunity to stop. I'm not going to take it. Just change direction. It's what I had intended, but he stopped his feet, so I said, this is a good opportunity here. He wanted to stop, so I allowed him to. Just touching him all over with the stick. He's still pretty touchy about his legs and his feet. I just keep touching him with it. At this point, I've still got to trim his front feet. I'm really trying to get him over being so touchy, and here all I want to do there was just change position, but he full of energy, so he won't take off. So I got him to stop his feet. I come in here and just start rubbing on him again, and he's real touchy up there around his ears, especially on the right side. Not so much on the left side, but the right side, he's really touchy up there. And getting these horses used to you picking up their feet and touching their feet, particularly a wild horse that's used their feet to paw and to protect themselves. Having a stick to reach out there and touch them with is just always a good idea. You never know what a horse is going to do, particularly a wild horse that's lived in the wild. There I'm teaching him to disengage his hindquarters. Just continue to rub him all over with that stick. I've had this stick and string. I made this years ago before they became real popular in the horse training industry. If they want to move their feet, I'll just allow them to express themselves, and I'll disengage their hindquarters and go right back to throwing this rope back over their back, around their hindquarters, up around their ears, wherever they seem to be touchy with them. And this really helps a horse get over stuff being up behind their head. They see it coming at them, and it moves on both sides. It starts out on one side of their body and ends up on the other side of their body. And they can see that, and they feel it, and it really conditions the horse for when you're going to saddle them and when you're going to eventually mount them. So it's a really good tool. I really like a stick and a string, and I've never bought one. I've just always made them. Here again, I'm just moving him around, and he'll want to tip his head to the outside, or he'll want to go straight, and I'll just apply pressure to his head with the rope and the halter, pull his head in, push his hip out, and just get him to give to that. And there I get him to give his hip, and I go back to desensitizing him with the rope. All these things I'm doing are good releases of pressure. The things that we do repetitively, like getting him to move his hip there, getting him to shut down when he's wanting to move his feet, when he's viewing what I'm doing as pressure, are all mechanisms that we intentionally set up in the horse to make them more predictable. If I can get them following good habits that I instill in them, then when I go to get in a situation that may be a little bit Western, I've got some tools to work with. I think a lot of people try to get the horse used to things instead of really having a process where they teach a horse to deal with stresses and to have some mechanisms in place to deal with them in a healthy way, in a safe way. And that's what it's all about. You have to have a process in mind. There, when I started lunging him, he was kind of wanting to just stand there, so I had to escalate my pressure up. I asked him by just applying pressure to the air, and then finally I had to tap him on the neck to get him to move his feet, and just rubbed him all over, letting him know what is pressure and what's not pressure. I think that's a really good key that people miss out on. As long as you balance them out, they're pretty good. You've got to take and teach them what is pressure and what's not pressure. When I ask you to move your feet, my body looks a certain way, my actions are a certain way. But when I'm not asking you to move your feet and I'm just waving something around, then they're going to take and know the difference. So here I got my stick and string around his leg, and I'm picking his foot up, looking at it. He is kind of nippy, so I have to really watch. He's taken a bite out of me a couple times, and just using that stick and that string as a good tool to pick their feet up for the first time. And the really important thing is to just, I think a lot of times people will see how much the horse will put up with, and then it'll become a fight, or the horse will react, and then they went too far and made it a bad habit or a bad experience for the horse. When you can use building blocks, maybe the horse will stand there with their foot in the air for 30 seconds. Maybe they won't. But the key is, if I can take and keep it up for a second and put it down, the next time I can hold it up for 5 seconds and put it down. And I never push the horse to the point to where it's a fight. And we do it a lot of times when we're trimming horses, even in older horses, because we want to get the horse trimmed or we want to get the horse shod. And it's always better to move slower, particularly with these colts. Don't ever make it something that's bad. An old horseman told me one time, he said, it's kind of like a gumball machine, and you can put one black licorice gumball in there. Nobody likes a black licorice gumball. You can put it in there. It doesn't matter how many good gumballs there are in that gumball machine. Eventually you turn that handle enough and that black licorice gumball is going to come out. And that's how we have to look at our horses and the experiences that we put them through. We just have to take our time and try not to put any of those bad experiences into their experience with us, so that they never come out. It's not always the case. Sometimes, we make mistakes and things happen and we have to deal with them. But what I try to do is make those experiences as few as possible, and just make smaller changes. And it does take a little while to do. It takes a lot longer than what most people are used to doing or used to seeing. I think a lot of the colt starting that we see today, and I've been involved in colt startings, and I think it has kind of changed the psyche of horse owners in this country, and they think about wanting to get the horse trained as fast as possible or as quick as possible, and people put a lot of emphasis on that. And I think it's kind of industry driven. You have a lot of these reiners and cutters that are real young, and they're wanting to get this horse ready for futurity or something of that nature, and they really push the horse to take and go as quick as possible and learn as much as possible, when I think slower is better, and you have a little bit better product at the end, and the horse has time to mature mentally. Right there's the first time I asked him to back up. He's learning to back up, and this horse's patience is pretty thin. I'll do a lot of changing. I change up what I do with him. Here I'm asking him to back up. And what I'm doing, I'm just tapping on that lead rope, teaching him to back up, and it's kind of a rhythmic pressure. Just tapping on that lead rope, getting him to back up and move his feet in reverse. One of the things that really helps these horses around that are head shy, you can take this rope and just throw it up over their head, throw it around their back, getting them to turn around. This is the first time I ever did this with this horse. I'm just throwing it behind his hip, asking him to turn around, wanting him to follow his nose. He's really kind of slow and sluggish and resistive, so I really want him to move his feet and really want him to take and kind of move faster. If you have a slow horse, I don't want this particular horse to be just a performance horse. This is going to be a family horse, but if he's kind of slow and sluggish, I'd like to get him freed up a little bit. If I have a really fast-minded horse that likes to really move their feet, then I'll take and try to do things that get them to slow down their mind and slow down their feet and not be so reactive. There again, it's all about balance. Now he's really touchy about his head, so I do a lot of work with this rope, just throwing it around his ears and trying to get him over being so sensitive around his head and ears. Here, I'm just going to bump him with the rope. And finally, he takes a step back. And sometimes you have to escalate your pressure quite a bit, particularly in the beginning. It's not always pretty. You just have to start out slow and reward the slightest try. That's the most important thing. If they're trying to back up, if they're thinking about backing up, rewarding that really, really helps them. I changed things up quite a bit. There he's really beginning to move backwards. Here I have to escalate my pressure quite a bit, but he finally does back up. And like I say, he's kind of sluggish, so getting him, once he stops, getting him to move his feet again, getting him to respond to what you're wanting him to do, is sometimes a little bit of a challenge. Here I'm trying a little something new with him. This is kind of a beginner driving. I'll take and just throw it across their back and drive them forward. Try to get them to follow that pressure. And these square pins will really help you out in this regard, because they'll go into the corner and they'll turn. And it really helps them learn to follow their nose. He has a little bit more trouble on this side, but he does learn to just take and follow his nose here and follow that pressure. This is more of a position that I would be in if I was on his back, asking him to tip his nose. So I really wanted him to get responsive to the pressure, and just I'll drive him around and wait for him to get in a good position for me to get the right leverage, the right position to turn him. You can see he's kind of struggling with it on this side. It's a new concept to him, but he'll get in the right position here in a minute, and he'll tip his nose around, and then it'll become like clockwork to him. The light bulb will go off. Right there, he learned to tip his nose to the inside and just follow that feel. And you'll see him, he gets softer and softer. The more I work him, the more I disengage the hindquarters. And one of the things that we have to really keep in mind is keeping the idea that if the hip moves, the front end's going to move. So I put a lot of emphasis on moving those hips, getting them really freed up. That's where your control comes from. You can, I don't know how many horses I've been on that you could turn their head and crank around on them, and they would still keep going forward or sideways or whatever. So it's not about the head and neck as much as it is about the hip. You have to be able to turn that engine off. You have to be able to turn that impulsion off. So here, first time I asked him to back up there, I've been asking him to back up, and I did cut this video quite a bit because a lot of stuff I do is just repetitious. Just asked him to do the same thing, same way, until he kind of gets better at it, and just changing up the routine, because he gets kind of he doesn't have much patience for doing things over and over and over. Generally, you'll see that in mares more than you will a stud colt, but he doesn't have a whole lot of patience for for some things. Here, I'll just reach down and pick his leg up. And I find it, really beneficial to just change things up a lot. Go from one thing to the next with these horses. And it tends to keep their mind unhobbled, so to speak. If you just work on one thing, they'll get into like a fight, tensious mode where they're not going to do what you ask. So if I change things up a lot, then they tend to be more willing to do what I'm wanting. And here, he just does not like his ears being touched. I've worked a lot on this, catching him, haltering him. I've let him out, and he's been tied out, and been working with him, teaching him to lead. Leading was a chore because he's a big boy, and he dragged me around quite a bit. But I got him leading, got him moving his feet forward on the outside. So what I'm basically doing in this little square pen is just refining what I've done outside, just getting a little bit more control of him. I don't want it to be a tug of war every time I go outside the pen. And I spend quite a bit of time here just teaching him to drop his head, rubbing him on his ears. If you got a horse that's hard to halter, hard to bridle, you can't touch them on their ears. The very first thing that I'll do with a horse like that is I'll teach them to drop their head. And 9 times out of 10, whatever issue you had, if it doesn't go away altogether, it's definitely going to be easier to deal with. So that's what I'm doing here, just rubbing his ears. And when he's more accepting, when he drops his head, I'll take and I'll relieve the pressure by petting him down his back. Then I'll come back and ask him again, touch him, ask him to drop his head. And once he's, he drops his head and he's a little bit more accepting, then I'll retreat. And there again, it's a good calming mechanism that teaches him to relax and not be so tense about things. So he's coming along. He still does not like that. It's mostly on that right side. Don't know whatever happened to him on that side. Maybe something happened. Maybe it's just his particular attitude and his mindset. But he doesn't like being touched on that right side of his head. That's where his issue's at. Left side doesn't really bother him. You get up there around the right side of his eye, the right side of his ear, he don't want nothing to do with it. So I'm just teaching him to drop his head and just pinching his pole. And then as soon as he does, relaxes, then I'll retreat and then come back again. And here's one of those times where I probably should have quit him a little sooner than I did. He gets really frustrated with it. But I was really wanting him to really drop his head, and he had a lot of tension built up in his body. He was breathing short. I really wanted him to blow and just let his air out and really relax, and he didn't. And when I kept going, he got kind of aggravated and started pawing here at the end. And I probably should have quit him a little sooner than I did. I was really looking for that just big release, just let all that air out. A horse will hold tension in their body, and they'll breathe real short breaths. You hear a lot of horses doing that when they're moving. They're just taking real short breaths, and you can tell they're not relaxed. They're just tensed up. And the whole time I was doing this, he was somewhat accepting, but he never did take that big old blow and lick and chew and just relax. And I spend a lot of time just getting him to drop his head. There he did pretty good. You can see he started pawing there. And I said, probably went a little too far. So now I'll change it up and I'll get him to move his feet. get his mind moving, do something new here. Just throw a rope up over him as he's going, and this really teaches him what's pressure and what's not. There again, I'm not asking him to go forward. I'm not asking him to move his feet, any particular way. Just throwing that rope up over him, and it's going to teach him to be quiet about ropes moving around him, the reins moving around him, and the mechanism that I'm teaching him is just disengage your hindquarters. When you get scared, your head's high, you're fighting that pressure, I want you to disengage that hip and face me head on. And that's a good mechanism to have. Allowing him to move forward lets him express himself, and you never know. It's just like the rope and the string. The rope and the string were basically the same thing, but he just had issues with it. Now I'm coming in. He was a little excited about the rope, and I'm going to ask him to drop his head and relax. You can see he's tensed up. He's holding tension in his body. This is where a lot of times I'll pat them. If they've got a lot of tension, I'll pat them on the belly. I'll pat them, and a lot of times that'll get them to release that tension in their body. Because we're looking for the horse to have a better mental state, not just get used to what we're doing. You have to be aware of the horse's emotional state, what they're thinking about. If a horse is tense, I see a lot of people working horses, and the horses are doing what they're asking, but they're tense and they're nervous. And the Arab mare that I've been riding, that came with this horse, she's the same way. She rides, and I've rode her out, but she's tense the whole time, and you can see that people really didn't take much care for her mental state. So we have to be mindful of those things when we're training, and not just get a horse used to something, but get them okay with it mentally and emotionally. It's not just about putting saddle on them and them not bucking. I want a horse that's balanced mentally, emotionally, and physically. Here I'm putting the rope around their withers, rope around the loin, and he didn't seem to have too much trouble with it. There again, I'm not going to push him. I'm going to change things up fairly quick and move to the next thing. And this is stuff that I'll do, every time. Eventually I'll put a rope around him and really put some tension on him. I think doing this helps. I'm wanting him to move his feet forward. I'm wanting him to feel that tension, that rope around him. And this is just a building block to putting a rope on him, where I can really put some tension on him and put some pressure on him. There again, when he gets excited, just turn and face me, and I'll take that pressure away. And that sets it up in the horse's mind, so that when there's something, that's grabbing them, there's something that's they feel pressure by, they have that mechanism to stop and think. And that's what it's all about. The more I can get that horse to stop and think about things, the less their flight instinct's going to take over. Here again, just every time I do something that gets their emotional level up, their adrenaline level up, then I'm going to ask them to drop their head. And he's not a big fan of it yet, but he's learning, and I'll keep asking him until he really lets down and really gets okay with just dropping his head and being relaxed. One of the issues with the horse world today I believe is that they're more result focused instead of process focused. And when we become process focused, we turn out better horses.
So he learned a lot today. He learned to back up. He learned to give his hindquarters a little better. He's still real touchy around his ears, but that's just every day, something you got to do every day to make it better. And he's coming around. I think I'll be able to trim his feet here. The next time I will tie him up, and I will trim his front feet and see how far we get. Sometimes on these colts, they don't have enough patience, like him right there pawing. He ain't got no patience for me. Just keep messing with his head. But he's a whole lot better than he was. So he's coming around. That's going to end up my horse working today. Probably work some more tomorrow. I already worked that mare. I want to take her for a ride, but I want to be gone for a while. It's getting late in the afternoon, and I need to get some stuff done on the fence. So that's going to wrap it up for my horse training today. Hope y'all enjoyed this. Horse training is just patience, persistence, and consistency. That's what it takes. You just keep doing the same thing the same way, and the more you work them, the better they get. So remember, in life, if you don't know which way to go, commit your ways unto the Lord. Submit also unto him, and he'll bring it to pass. We'll see you later.